Don't touch her again. That's what the silent stranger said before everything changed. In the frozen heart of Silver Hollow, where violence wore a father's face and winter never seemed to end, Mara Doyle had stopped counting bruises and started counting breaths. She thought survival was all she had left, until a man with ghost-gray eyes and a buried past stepped out of the storm, with vengeance in one hand and freedom in the other. This is her story. A story of fear, fury, and the quiet man who became her reckoning. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Mara's story travels. Hollow was a skeletal town buried in snow. The storm came down like broken glass. Mara Doyle stood at the cracked window of the shack, her breath fogging the warped pane as wind howled through the gaps in the walls. Outside, Silver Hollow was a skeletal town buried in snow. Mine shafts dark as coffins, streets empty except for the occasional flicker of lamplight through shutters bolted tight against the cold. She pressed her palm to the glass. It was cold enough to burn. Behind her, the fire in the iron stove sputtered and hissed, throwing weak light across the single room she shared with her father. The walls were bare except for water stains and the shadow of a crucifix that had fallen years ago and never been replaced. A table. 2 chairs. A cot in the corner that smelled like whiskey and rage. Mara was 57 years old, though the mirror, if she'd owned one, would have called her older. Her hair, once the color of honey, had gone dull and streaked with gray. Her hands were rough, knuckles swollen from years of scrubbing laundry in icy water and splitting kindling in the yard. But it was her eyes that told the real story. Brown, flecked with amber, and so tired they'd forgotten how to hope. She heard the creak of the chair behind her and went still. "Where's my supper?" Hank Doyle's voice was a low rasp, thick with drink, and the kind of bitterness that came from a life spent blaming everyone but himself. He sat slumped at the table, a half-empty bottle of rot-gut whiskey within arm's reach, his face ruddy and swollen beneath a tangle of greasy hair. He'd been a big man once, broad-shouldered, strong enough to work the mines and drink half the saloon under the table. Now he was just mean. "I'll heat the stew," Mara said quietly, not turning around. "I didn't ask when. I asked where." She moved to the stove, hands steady despite the tremor that lived somewhere deep in her chest. The pot was already there, leftover rabbit and turnips from 2 days ago. She stirred it with a wooden spoon, the scrape of metal on metal filling the silence. Hank grunted and took another pull from the bottle. "Useless woman. Can't even keep a damn fire going." Mara said nothing. She'd learned long ago that words were kindling. They only made things worse. She ladled the stew into a chipped bowl and set it in front of him, careful not to let their hands come close. Hank grabbed the spoon and shoveled food into his mouth, chewing noisily, his eyes fixed on nothing. Mara returned to the window. That's when she saw him. A figure stood at the edge of the yard, just beyond the broken fence where the snow had drifted into small hills. Tall, unmoving. A shadow against the white, wrapped in a long coat that snapped in the wind. Mara's breath caught. The stranger didn't move toward the shack, didn't call out. He simply stood there, facing the window as if he could see straight through the glass and into the rotten heart of the place. "What are you gawking at?" Hank's voice cut through the air like a blade. Mara stepped back from the window. "Nothing." "Don't lie to me, girl." She wasn't a girl, hadn't been for 40 years. But Hank still called her that, as if keeping her small in his mind made it easier to keep her small in the world. "There's someone outside," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hank's spoon clattered into the bowl. He shoved back from the table and crossed to the window in 3 unsteady strides, squinting into the storm. The yard was empty. "There's nobody out there, you fool woman." He turned on her, his face twisted with contempt. "You seeing ghosts now?" "I saw—" The back of his hand caught her across the mouth. Mara staggered, her shoulder hitting the wall. Pain bloomed hot and sharp across her lips, the taste of copper flooding her tongue. She didn't cry out. She'd learned that too. Hank loomed over her, breathing hard. "Don't you ever make a fool of me. You hear?" She nodded, eyes down. "Say it." "I hear you." He spat on the floor near her feet and returned to the table, muttering curses under his breath. Mara stayed where she was, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other braced against the wall. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her mind was somewhere else. Back at the window, at the stranger who had stood in the snow like a gravestone. She hadn't imagined him. She was sure of it. Morning came slow and gray, the storm dying into a bitter wind that rattled the shutters and sent fine snow sifting through the cracks. Mara woke on the floor near the stove, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that smelled like smoke and damp wool. Hank was still passed out at the table, his head pillowed on his arms, snoring wetly. She rose carefully, joints aching, and fed the last of the kindling into the stove. The fire caught reluctantly, spitting embers onto the ash-streaked floor. She needed more wood, needed cornmeal and salt, needed to get out of this place before the walls closed in completely. She pulled on her coat, a shapeless thing patched with mismatched fabric, and wrapped a scarf around her head. Hank didn't stir as she slipped out the door. The cold hit her like a fist. Mara hunched her shoulders and started down the narrow path toward town, her boots crunching through the frozen crust of snow. Silver Hollow was a mile away. A collection of sagging buildings clustered around the mouth of the old silver mine. The mine had played out years ago, but the town lingered like a bad habit, clinging to the hope that the veins would open again. The general store sat at the edge of the main street, its windows fogged and dark. A hand-painted sign above the door read, Callaway's Mercantile in faded letters. Mara pushed inside, a bell jingling overhead. Warmth hit her immediately, or what passed for warmth. An iron stove glowed in the corner, and the smell of coffee and old tobacco filled the air. The shelves were half empty, stocked with tins of beans, sacks of flour, and bolts of cheap fabric. Behind the counter stood Ezra Callaway, a rail-thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a nervous habit of wiping his hands on his apron. He looked up as Mara approached, his expression shifting from polite to wary. "Morning, Miss Doyle." "Morning, Ezra." She kept her head down, the scarf still wrapped around her face. Ezra's eyes flicked to the bruise darkening her cheekbone, visible even in the dim light. But he said nothing. No one ever did. "What can I get you?" "Cornmeal, salt if you have it, maybe a little lard." Ezra nodded and turned to gather the items. Mara stood at the counter, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. The door jingled behind her. "Morning, Ezra." Mara recognized the voice, Silas Greer, one of the old-timers who spent most of his days drinking at the saloon and spinning tales about the glory days of the mine. He shuffled past her without a glance, his coat reeking of cheap whiskey. "Silas," Ezra said, setting a small sack of cornmeal on the counter. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." Silas leaned against the counter, scratching at his beard. "You hear about the stranger?" Mara went still. Ezra frowned. "What stranger?" "Big fella. Came in last night on a black horse, tall as a damn tree. He's been asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "About Hank Doyle." The words dropped into the room like stones into a well. Mara's pulse quickened. She kept her eyes on the counter, on the sack of cornmeal, and the tin of lard Ezra was wrapping in brown paper. "What's he want with Hank?" Ezra asked, his voice low. Silas shrugged. "Didn't say. But he's got a look about him, like he ain't here to chat. I'd steer clear if I were you." Ezra glanced at Mara, then back at Silas. "Where's he staying?" "Boarding house, last I heard. Mrs. Kern's place." Mara took the parcels from Ezra, her hands trembling just slightly. She paid with the few coins she'd scraped together and turned toward the door. "Miss Doyle?" Ezra called after her. She stopped, not looking back. "You be careful." She nodded once and stepped out into the cold. The walk back felt longer. Mara kept her head down, the parcels clutched to her chest, her mind racing. A stranger asking about Hank. A man tall as a tree with a look about him. She told herself it was none of her business, told herself that whatever trouble Hank had coming, she wanted no part of it. But the lie tasted bitter even as she thought it. She was halfway down the main street when she nearly ran into him. He stood in the middle of the road, motionless, his coat dusted with snow. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily 6.5 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone and left out in the weather. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples, and his eyes, pale gray, cold as winter sky, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Mara stopped, her boots skidding slightly on the ice. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "Mara Doyle?" Her heart slammed against her ribs. Yes." He stepped closer. Not threatening, but deliberate. His gaze moved over her face, lingering on the bruise, the split lip, the faint purple shadows beneath her scarf. Something shifted in his expression, something dark and cold. "Is your father home?" The question froze her blood. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The parcel slipped slightly in her grip, and she tightened her hold, her knuckles white. She swallowed hard. "Why?" The stranger didn't answer. He simply held her gaze, waiting. Mara's instinct screamed at her to run, to lie, to say anything that would make him go away. But she didn't, because somewhere deep in the frozen wasteland of her chest, something flickered, something small and desperate and dangerous. Hope. "He's home," she whispered. The stranger nodded slowly, as if that was all he needed to hear. Then he turned and walked past her, his boots crunching in the snow, heading straight for the shack at the edge of town. Mara stood in the middle of the street, trembling, watching him go. She knew she should warn Hank. She knew she should run back and lock the door and hide under the table like she'd done 100 times before. But she didn't. Instead, she followed. By the time Mara reached the shack, the stranger was already inside. She stood in the yard, the parcels abandoned in the snow, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Through the cracked window, she could see shapes moving. Hank, stumbling to his feet, the stranger standing just inside the door like a wall of iron. Their voices were muffled, but she could hear the tone. Hank's bluster. The stranger's calm, measured replies. Then Hank's voice rose, sharp and angry. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about." "You do." The stranger's voice cut through the air like a blade. Quiet, but absolute. Mara crept closer, pressing herself against the wall near the door. She could see them now through the gap in the frame. Hank backed against the table, his face red, his hands balled into fists. The stranger stood in the center of the room, utterly still. 23 years ago, the stranger said, his voice low and even, "You ambushed a cattle drive outside of Blackstone Ridge, burned the wagons, killed the drivers, took everything they had." Hank's face went pale. "That's a damn lie. You left one man alive. A boy, really, 14 years old. You put a bullet in his shoulder and left him to bleed out in the dirt." The stranger took a step forward. "His name was Daniel Cross. He was my brother." The room went silent. Hank's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His eyes darted toward the door, toward the shotgun leaning in the corner, toward anything that might save him. "I don't—" Hank's voice cracked. "That wasn't—" "It was." The stranger's tone didn't change. "And you've been running from it ever since." Hank lunged for the shotgun. He didn't make it. The stranger moved, fast, impossibly fast, and caught Hank by the wrist, twisting it with a sharp crack that made Mara flinch. Hank screamed, dropping to his knees, his face contorted in pain. The stranger held him there, his expression cold and empty. "I could kill you," he said quietly, "and no one would stop me. No one would care." Hank whimpered, tears streaming down his face. "But I won't." The stranger released him, and Hank collapsed onto the floor, cradling his wrist. "Because I'm not here for you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. He dropped it onto the table with a dull thud, and the sound of coins shifting inside filled the room. "That's $500 in gold," the stranger said. "Enough to buy passage anywhere you want to go. Enough to disappear." Hank stared at the pouch, his face slack with confusion. "I don't understand." "It's not for you," the stranger said. He turned toward the door, toward the crack where Mara stood frozen. "It's for her." Mara's heart stopped. The stranger pushed the door open, and there she was, small and trembling, her coat dusted with snow, her eyes wide with fear and something else, something she couldn't name. He looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. "You don't have to stay here," he said quietly. "I have a cabin. In the mountains. It's safe. It's yours if you want it." Mara's throat closed. She couldn't speak. couldn't breathe. Behind the stranger, Hank struggled to his feet, clutching his wrist. "She's not going anywhere with you, you son of a—" The stranger didn't turn around. He simply raised one hand and Hank fell silent. "She chooses," the stranger said, "not you." He stepped aside, leaving the door open. Mara looked past him into the shack, at the table where she'd eaten 1,000 silent meals, at the cot where she'd slept with one eye open, at Hank, broken and pathetic, his face twisted with impotent rage. She thought about the gold on the table. She thought about the cabin in the mountains. She thought about the bruises on her arms and the taste of blood in her mouth, and the 57 years she'd spent surviving instead of living. And then she stepped forward, past the stranger, into the shack. She picked up the pouch of gold, felt its weight in her hands. Hank's eyes went wide. "Mara, don't you dare!" She didn't look at him. She walked out the door, past the stranger, and into the yard. The stranger followed. At the edge of the fence, a black horse waited, its breath steaming in the cold air. The stranger mounted in one smooth motion, then extended a hand toward Mara. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her that this was a trap, that men like him didn't offer freedom, they offered chains with a different name. But when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see hunger or cruelty or the hollow promises of a liar. She saw grief, and something else. Purpose. Mara took his hand. He pulled her up behind him, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, the pouch of gold pressed between them. The horse turned, and Silver Hollow began to fall away behind them. Mara didn't look back. But as the town disappeared into the white distance, she heard the sound of hooves, faint at first, then growing louder. Riders, coming fast. The stranger heard them too. She felt him go still, felt the shift in his posture as he turned his head slightly, listening. "Hold on," he said quietly. And they rode into the storm. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls as the stranger, Gideon, though Mara didn't know his name yet, urged his horse into a hard gallop. Snow sprayed up from the animal's hooves, and Mara tightened her grip around his waist, the leather pouch digging into her ribs. "Who are they?" she shouted over the wind. "Men your father hired," Gideon called back. "Or men he owes." "Doesn't matter which." Mara risked a glance over her shoulder. 3 riders emerged from the white haze behind them, dark shapes against the snow, their horses laboring through the drifts. One of them raised his arm, and she saw the glint of metal. "They have guns." "I know." Gideon pulled the horse sharply to the left, off the main trail and into a narrow gulch between 2 ridges of rock. The path was treacherous, barely wide enough for the horse, with ice-slicked stones jutting up like teeth. Mara's heart hammered as they navigated the passage, the sound of pursuit growing fainter but not disappearing. "Why are they following us?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Because your father put a price on you." The words hit her like a slap. "What?" "He sent word to the saloon before we left. $50 to anyone who brings you back." Mara's stomach twisted. $50. That was more than most men in Silver Hollow made in 3 months. To Hank, she was worth more as property than as a daughter. "He can't—" Her voice broke. "I'm not his to sell." "He doesn't see it that way." They emerged from the gulch onto a higher trail, the wind shrieking around them. Gideon slowed the horse just enough to scan the terrain ahead, a steep climb through pine trees bent double under the weight of snow. Behind them, the riders appeared at the mouth of the gulch. One of them fired. The shot cracked through the air, and Mara felt the bullet whip past her ear, so close she heard the hiss of it. She pressed herself against Gideon's back, terror flooding her veins. Gideon didn't flinch. He spurred the horse forward, up the slope, the animal's muscles straining beneath them. The trees closed in around them, branches heavy with snow scraping at Mara's coat, her face. Another shot. This one went wide, thudding into a tree trunk. "How far to the cabin?" Mara gasped. 2 miles, maybe less." "Can we make it?" "We'll make it." His voice was calm, certain, and Mara found herself believing him even as the world tilted and spun around her. They crested the ridge and plunged down the other side, the horse sliding on the icy ground. Mara bit back a scream as they careened past a sheer drop, loose stones clattering into the abyss below. Gideon guided the animal with precision, his hands steady on the reins. his body moving in perfect rhythm with the horse. The riders followed, but they were slowing. The terrain was too rough, their horses not as sure-footed. One of them shouted something Mara couldn't make out, his voice swallowed by the wind. They descended into a valley thick with pines, the snow deeper here, untouched except for the tracks of deer and smaller game. Gideon slowed the horse to a walk, listening. Silence. Mara's breath came in ragged gasps, her whole body shaking, from cold, from fear, from the sheer impossibility of what had just happened. "Are they gone?" she whispered. "For now." Gideon's voice was flat. "They'll regroup, come at us from another direction." "Why do you sound so sure?" "Because that's what I do." He urged the horse forward again, slower this time, weaving through the trees. Mara's mind raced, trying to piece together what she knew. Gideon had come to Silver Hollow looking for her father, had confronted him about something that happened 23 years ago. An ambush, a boy left for dead. "Your brother," she said quietly. "Daniel. Did he survive?" Gideon's shoulders tensed just slightly. "No. I'm sorry." "Don't be. You didn't pull the trigger." "But my father did." "Yes." The word hung in the cold air between them. Mara's throat tightened. "Why didn't you kill him? You had the chance." Gideon was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, because killing him wouldn't bring Daniel back, and it wouldn't save you. "Save me?" Mara's laugh was bitter, broken. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. They rode in silence for another half-mile, the trees thinning as they approached a clearing. In the center stood a cabin, small, solid, built from rough-hewn logs and chinked with mud. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin gray thread against the white sky. Gideon dismounted and helped Mara down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, her muscles stiff from the cold in the ride. She caught herself against the horse's flank, breathing hard. Gideon led the animal to a small lean-to beside the cabin and began unsaddling it. Mara stood in the snow, clutching the pouch of gold, unsure what to do with herself. "Inside," Gideon said without looking at her, "there's a fire going." Mara hesitated, then walked to the cabin door. It swung open on leather hinges, revealing a single room, sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling behind an iron grate. A narrow bed sat in the corner, covered with thick wool blankets. A table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with tins and dried goods. A rifle mounted above the door. It was more than Mara had expected, more than she'd had in years. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The warmth hit her immediately, and she felt something inside her chest crack just slightly. She crossed to the fire and sank down onto the stone hearth, her hands shaking as she held them toward the flames. The door opened behind her and Gideon entered, carrying saddlebags and a bedroll. He set them near the bed and shrugged out of his coat, hanging it on a peg by the door. Up close, in the firelight, Mara could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, mid-40s maybe, but his face carried the weight of someone who'd lived twice that long. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale and old. His hands were scarred too, knuckles thick and misshapen from old breaks. He moved with the economy of a man who'd spent years sleeping rough and traveling light. No wasted motion, no hesitation. "There's coffee," he said, nodding toward the pot on the stove. "And stew if you're hungry." Mara nodded, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Her mind was still reeling, trying to catch up with everything that had happened in the last hour. Gideon poured 2 tin cups of coffee and handed her one. She took it, her fingers numb against the hot metal. "Drink," he said. She did. The coffee was bitter and strong, and it burned all the way down. She welcomed the pain. Gideon sat down at the table, his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. He drank his coffee in silence, waiting. Finally, Mara found her voice. "What happens now?" "You rest, get your strength back. And then? Then we figure out what you want." Mara stared at him. "What I want?" "You're free now. That money's yours. You can go anywhere. Do anything. Just like that." Just like that. Mara's hands tightened around the cup. And what do you get out of this? Gideon's expression didn't change. Nothing. Nobody does something for nothing. I do. Why? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that wasn't cold or distant, something raw. Because I couldn't save my brother, he said quietly. But I can save you. The words settled between them like stones. Mara looked away, blinking hard. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of this stranger who'd upended her entire world in the span of an afternoon. I don't need saving, she said, her voice rough. Maybe not, but you deserved the choice. She didn't know what to say to that. They sat in silence, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. Mara sipped her coffee and tried to think, to plan, but her mind felt like it was moving through mud. Everything was too big, too fast, too impossible. What's your name? She asked finally. Gideon Cross. Gideon. She tested the name on her tongue. How long have you been looking for my father? 23 years? That's a long time. Yes. What took you so long to find him? Gideon's jaw tightened. He changed his name, moved around, got good at disappearing, but people like him always leave a trail. You just have to know where to look. And now that you found him, it's done. Just like that? Just like that. Mara frowned. You're not going back? Not going to make him pay? He'll pay. Gideon's voice was flat, certain. Men like your father always do. Maybe not today, maybe not by my hand, but the weight catches up eventually. Mara thought about Hank, alone in that shack with his broken wrist and his rot-gut whiskey and the ghost of the man he used to be. She thought about the years she'd spent under his roof, absorbing his anger like a sponge soaking up poison. She didn't feel sorry for him. She felt nothing, and that, more than anything, terrified her. Those men who are chasing us, she said, changing the subject, will they come here? Eventually. How many? 3. Maybe more by now. Can you fight them? Gideon met her eyes. If I have to. And if you can't? I can. There was no arrogance in his tone, just fact. Mara set down her cup and stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the snow was falling again, thick and fast, erasing their tracks. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Do what? Be free. The words came out broken, raw, and Mara hated herself for saying them, but they were true. She'd spent so many years surviving, keeping her head down, swallowing her rage, making herself small, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to want something, to choose something. She heard Gideon stand, heard his footsteps cross the room. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. You don't have to know, he said quietly. Not yet. Just rest. The rest will come. Mara opened her eyes and looked at him. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those cold gray eyes, held something she hadn't expected. Kindness. Not pity, not condescension, just simple, quiet kindness. Why are you doing this? She asked again, because she still couldn't believe it. Couldn't trust it. Gideon was silent for a long moment. Then he turned away, walking back to the table. Because no one did it for me, he said, and I swore that if I ever had the chance, I'd do better. Mara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She walked to the bed and sat down, her body aching, her mind exhausted. Gideon moved around the cabin, checking the door, banking the fire, setting the rifle within easy reach. You should sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. What about you? I don't sleep much. Mara wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She lay down on the bed, pulling the blankets over herself, and closed her eyes. She didn't expect to sleep, but the warmth of the fire and the weight of the blankets pulled her under almost immediately, dragging her into a deep, dreamless dark. When she woke, the cabin was dim, the fire reduced to glowing embers. She sat up, disoriented, her heart pounding. Gideon was at the window, silhouetted against the faint light of dawn. He held the rifle loosely in one hand, his body tense. What is it? Mara whispered. They're here. Mara's blood ran cold. She slipped out of bed and crossed to the window, peering out into the gray pre-dawn light. 3 men stood at the edge of the clearing, their horses stamping and snorting in the cold. They were rough-looking, dressed in patched coats and wide-brimmed hats, their faces hard and weathered. One of them held a torch, the flames flickering in the wind. The man in the center, tall and broad, with a thick beard, raised his voice. "Gideon Cross! We know you're in there." Gideon didn't move. "We got no quarrel with you," the man continued. "We just want the woman. Hank Doyle's offering good money for her safe return. You hand her over, we'll leave peaceful-like." Mara's stomach twisted. "What do we do?" "We don't do anything," Gideon said quietly. "You stay here, I'll handle it." "Handle it how?" He didn't answer. He set the rifle down and walked to the door, pulling on his coat. "Gideon," he looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Trust me." And then he stepped outside. Mara watched from the window, her heart in her throat, as Gideon walked into the clearing. He moved slowly, deliberately, his hands visible at his sides. The 3 men shifted, hands moving toward their guns. "That's far enough," the bearded man said. Gideon stopped about 20 feet away. "You're trespassing." The man grinned. "We're just doing a job." "Not anymore." "You gonna stop us?" "If I have to." The bearded man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. 3 against 1. "I like those odds." "You shouldn't." The laughter died. The bearded man's hand moved toward his gun, and Gideon moved. Mara barely saw it. One moment Gideon was standing still. The next, he was in motion, a blur of speed and precision. He closed the distance between himself and the nearest man in 2 strides, driving his fist into the man's jaw with a crack that echoed across the clearing. The man went down hard, unconscious before he hit the ground. The second man drew his gun, but Gideon was already there. He caught the man's wrist and twisted, hard, and the gun went flying into the snow. A knee to the gut, an elbow to the temple. The man crumpled. The bearded man finally got his gun out, but his hands were shaking. He pointed it at Gideon, finger on the trigger. "Don't," Gideon said, his voice low and deadly. The bearded man fired. The shot went wide, the bullet whining past Gideon's shoulder. Gideon didn't stop. He crossed the space between them, knocked the gun aside, and drove his fist into the man's stomach. The bearded man doubled over, gasping, and Gideon brought his knee up into the man's face. The bearded man went down in a heap, blood streaming from his nose. Gideon stood over the 3 fallen men, breathing hard but steady. He picked up the bearded man's gun and emptied the chambers, letting the bullets fall into the snow. Then he crouched down and grabbed the man by the collar, hauling him halfway upright. "You listening?" Gideon's voice was quiet, but it carried. The bearded man nodded, blood dripping from his chin. "You go back to Silver Hollow. You tell Hank Doyle that if he sends anyone else after her, I'll come for him. And next time I won't walk away. You understand?" The man nodded again, eyes wide with fear. Gideon released him, and the man scrambled backward, clutching his ribs. He and his companion staggered to their feet, helped each other onto their horses, and rode off into the trees without looking back. Mara stood at the window, trembling, her hands pressed to the glass. Gideon walked back to the cabin, his face expressionless. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, brushing snow from his coat. "Are you hurt?" Mara asked, her voice shaking. "No." "How did you—" She stopped, unable to find the words. Gideon hung his coat on the peg and walked to the fire, adding more wood. "I was a soldier once, a long time ago." "What kind of soldier moves like that?" "The kind who had to." Mara sank down onto the edge of the bed, her legs weak. "They'll go back to my father." "Yes." "And he'll send more." "Maybe." "You can't fight them all." Gideon looked at her, his gray eyes steady. "I can fight enough." Mara didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This man, this stranger, had just taken down 3 armed men without breaking a sweat, and he was standing there calmly adding wood to the fire like it was nothing. "Why are you so calm?" she demanded. "Because panic doesn't help. Doesn't it scare you, knowing they'll keep coming?" Gideon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've lived with worse." There was something in his tone, something dark and heavy that made Mara stop asking questions. They spent the rest of the morning in silence. Gideon made breakfast, fried salt pork and cornmeal mush, and they ate without speaking. Mara's mind raced, trying to process everything, trying to figure out what came next. She watched Gideon as he moved around the cabin, efficient and methodical. He cleaned the rifle, checked the ammunition, reinforced the door with an extra bar. Every action was deliberate, purposeful. He was preparing for a siege. "How long can we stay here?" Mara asked finally. "As long as we need to." "And if they don't give up?" "Then we leave." "Where would we go?" Gideon looked at her. "Where do you want to go?" Mara opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't know. She'd never thought that far ahead. Her entire life had been about surviving the next day, the next hour, the next minute. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's all right. You have time to figure it out." But even as he said it, Mara saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept drifting to the window. They didn't have time, and they both knew it. That night, Mara lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Gideon sat at the table, the rifle across his lap. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. "Gideon," she said quietly. "Yeah? What happened to you after your brother died?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I went to war. Thought maybe if I fought hard enough, killed enough men, it would balance the scales. Make things right. Did it? No. What did you do after?" "Drifted." Mara turned onto her side, looking at him. "So you just spent 23 years hunting my father?" "Not just him. There were others. Men who were there that night. Most of them are dead now." "Did you kill them?" "Some. Others did it themselves. Whiskey, gambling debts, bar fights. Men like that don't live long." "And my father?" "He was the last." Mara's throat tightened. "So what now? Now that it's done?" Gideon looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that looked like uncertainty. "I don't know," he said. They fell silent again. Mara closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. She kept thinking about the men in the clearing, about Hank, alone in that shack, probably already sending word to anyone who would listen, about the future stretching out before her, vast and terrifying and full of possibilities she didn't know how to name. She thought about Gideon, this quiet man who'd walked into her life like a storm and torn everything apart. She didn't know if she should hate him or thank him, maybe both. The days that followed settled into a strange, uneasy rhythm. Gideon kept watch, always alert, always ready. Mara tried to make herself useful, cooking, mending, organizing the supplies. It felt good to have purpose, even if that purpose was just surviving another day. They didn't talk much, but the silences between them grew less heavy, less fraught. One afternoon, Mara was washing dishes when she heard the sound of hooves outside. She froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. Gideon was already at the window, rifle in hand. "How many?" Mara whispered. "One." A single rider approached the cabin, moving slowly. As he drew closer, Mara could see he was older, gray-haired, wearing a long coat and a star pinned to his chest. A lawman. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Stay inside." He opened the door and stepped out, the rifle held loosely at his side. The rider stopped about 30 feet from the cabin and dismounted. He was tall, lean, with sharp features and eyes like chips of ice. "Gideon Cross," the man said. His voice was smooth, cultured, not what Mara expected from a frontier marshal. "Marshal," Gideon replied evenly. "Or should I call you Captain Alistair Crow?" Mara's breath caught. From inside the cabin she watched through the crack in the door, her heart pounding. Gideon didn't move. "That name's dead." "Is it?" The marshal smiled, cold and thin. "Funny, the army doesn't seem to think so. Neither does the family of General Marcus Vane. Vane was a traitor. Vane was a war hero, and you put a bullet in his head." "He deserved it." The marshal's smile widened. "Maybe so, but that's not for you to decide, Captain. That's for a court, a jury. There wasn't time for a trial. There never is with men like you." The marshal took a step closer. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to come with me. peaceful-like. And the woman inside that cabin is going to tell me everything she knows about Hank Doyle and the bounty he put on her head. Gideon's grip on the rifle tightened. She's not part of this. She is now. No. The marshal's expression hardened. I'm not asking, Captain. Mara didn't think. She just moved. She threw open the door and stepped outside, her voice cutting through the cold air. Gideon, run! The marshal's hand went to his gun, and Mara saw the flash of metal, heard the crack of the shot. Pain exploded in her shoulder, white-hot and blinding. She staggered, her legs buckling, and then Gideon was there, catching her before she hit the ground. The world spun. Mara heard another shot, felt Gideon's body jerk as he shielded her, and then everything went dark. When Mara opened her eyes, the first thing she felt was fire. It burned through her left shoulder, radiating down her arm and across her chest in waves that made her teeth clench and her breath come in short, desperate gasps. She tried to move and immediately regretted it, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Don't! Gideon's voice, low and urgent, cut through the haze of pain. Stay still. She blinked, trying to focus. She was lying on the bed in the cabin, blankets piled on top of her. The room swam in and out of focus, firelight dancing across the log walls. Gideon knelt beside her, his hands stained red, pressing a folded cloth against her shoulder. What? Her voice came out as a rasp. You were shot. The memory slammed back into her. The marshal, the gunshot, the blinding pain. The marshal, she gasped. Where? Dead. The word was flat, emotionless. Mara's eyes widened. You killed him? He shot you. He didn't leave me a choice. Gideon's jaw was tight, his face a mask of controlled fury. He lifted the cloth from her shoulder, examined the wound, then pressed it back down. Mara hissed through her teeth. How bad is it? She managed. Bad enough. Bullet went clean through, but you're bleeding heavy. I need to cauterize it. Cauterize? Panic spiked through her. You mean, burn it closed? Yes. He met her eyes, his expression grim. It's going to hurt. A lot. But if I don't do it, you'll bleed out before morning. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to say no, to tell him there had to be another way, but she could feel the warm wetness spreading beneath her, could see the dark stains seeping through the blankets. Do it, she whispered. Gideon nodded once. He crossed to the fireplace and pulled a long iron poker from the flames. The tip glowed red-hot, shimmering in the dim light. Mara's breath came faster, shallow, and quick. Gideon returned to the bed and knelt beside her. Bite down on this. He handed her a leather strap, thick and worn. And hold on to something. She took the strap with trembling hands and put it between her teeth. Her good hand gripped the edge of the bed frame, knuckles white. Gideon lifted the cloth from her shoulder. Blood welled up immediately, dark and thick. Ready? He asked. Mara nodded, squeezing her eyes shut. The first touch of the poker was worse than anything she'd ever felt. White-hot agony exploded through her shoulder, and she screamed against the leather, her body arching off the bed. Gideon's hand pressed down on her chest, holding her still as he worked, the smell of burning flesh filling the cabin. Mara's vision went white, then black, then white again. She heard Gideon's voice, distant and muffled, telling her to breathe, to stay with him, but the words barely registered. All she knew was pain, endless, consuming, obliterating pain. And then it stopped. The poker pulled away and Gideon set it aside. Mara lay gasping, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. Gideon worked quickly, wrapping her shoulder with clean strips of cloth torn from a shirt. His hands were steady, efficient, and when he finished, he pulled the blankets back up over her and stepped back. It's done, he said quietly. Mara spat out the leather strap and sucked in a ragged breath. Her throat was raw from screaming, her shoulder a throbbing mass of agony, but the bleeding had stopped. Thank you, she whispered. Gideon said nothing. He walked to the basin and washed the blood from his hands, his movements methodical. When he turned back, his face was unreadable. The marshal, Mara said, forcing the words out. What did you do with him? Buried him, about a mile from here. Won't someone come looking? Eventually, but not right away. He was working alone. How do you know? Because men like him always do. They want the glory for themselves. Mara closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. What did he call you? Captain Alistair Crow? Gideon's expression darkened. That was a long time ago. Is it true? Did you kill a general? Yes. The word hung in the air between them. Mara opened her eyes and looked at him. Why? Gideon was silent for a long moment. Then he crossed to the table and sat down, his back to the wall, his rifle within reach. During the war, he said slowly, I was part of a special unit. We did the jobs no one else wanted: infiltration, sabotage, assassination when it was called for. General Vane commanded our division. He paused, his jaw working. At first, Vane was a good officer, tough but fair. He cared about his men, but as the war dragged on, something changed in him. He started making deals, selling information to the enemy, trading prisoners for gold. Mara's stomach twisted. My unit found out, Gideon continued. We tried to report it through proper channels, but Vane had friends in high places. They buried it. Told us to keep our mouths shut or face a court-martial. But you didn't. No, we kept digging, found proof, documents, ledgers, names of the men Vane had sold into forced labor, men who were supposed to be under his protection. Gideon's hands curled into fists on the table. We confronted him. Told him we were taking the evidence to the War Department. He laughed, said no one would believe a bunch of low-born soldiers over a decorated general. Then he ordered his guards to arrest us. What happened? We fought our way out. 3 of my men died in the process. The rest scattered. I went after Vane. Mara's breath caught. And you killed him. I put a bullet in his head and left the evidence on his desk for his adjutant to find. Then I disappeared. Did it work? Did the evidence get out? Gideon's expression was bleak. Some of it. Enough to start an investigation. But Vane's allies made sure the story got twisted. They painted me as a traitor, a madman who killed his commanding officer in cold blood. The truth got buried under lies. So you've been running ever since? Yes. Mara stared at him, trying to reconcile the quiet, methodical man in front of her with the image of a soldier who'd put a bullet in a general's head. Do you regret it? She asked. Gideon met her eyes. No, Vane deserved to die. I'd do it again. Even knowing what it cost you? Even then. There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt. Mara lay back against the pillow, her mind spinning. The marshal said Vane's family is still looking for you. They are. They've been looking for 13 years, and now they know where you are. Maybe, or maybe the marshal was just fishing. Either way, we can't stay here much longer. Where will we go? Gideon was quiet for a moment. There's a city, Denver. I have contacts there, people who can help. Help how? Get you somewhere safe. Set you up with new papers, a new name if you want it. The gold I gave you will be enough to start over. Mara's chest tightened. And what about you? I'll keep moving, same as I always have. That's not a life. It's the only one I've got. Mara wanted to argue, but the pain in her shoulder flared again, stealing her breath. She closed her eyes, feeling the pull of sleep dragging her under. Rest, Gideon said. We'll figure out the details later. She wanted to stay awake, to keep talking, but her body had other ideas. Within minutes, she was asleep. When she woke again, it was dark outside. The fire had burned low, and Gideon sat at the window, silhouetted against the faint glow of dawn. He hadn't moved from his post. Mara shifted carefully, testing her shoulder. It hurt, a deep throbbing ache, but it was bearable. She sat up slowly, her head spinning. How long was I asleep? She asked. 6 hours, maybe 7. Did you sleep at all? No? Gideon, I'm fine. But he didn't look fine. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders tight with tension. Mara swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, holding onto the bedpost for balance. Her knees wobbled, but she stayed upright. You should eat something, Gideon said without turning around. So should you. I will, later. Mara crossed to the stove and found a pot of stew, cold now, but edible. She ladled some into a bowl and forced herself to eat, even though her stomach churned with every bite. As she ate, she watched Gideon. He sat perfectly still, his eyes scanning the tree line, his hand resting on the rifle. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Riders, trackers, anyone who might have followed the marshal." "You think they're out there?" "I think it's safer to assume they are." Mara set down her bowl and walked to the window, standing beside him. The forest was silent, the snow pristine and untouched. "I don't see anything," she said. "Neither do I. But that doesn't mean they're not there." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the dawn break over the mountains. The light was pale and cold, turning the snow to silver. "Why did you do it?" Mara asked quietly. "Why did you risk everything to save me?" Gideon didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Because you screamed my name. You could have stayed inside, could have let the marshal take me, but you didn't. I didn't want you to die." "Why?" Mara hesitated. She didn't have a good answer, or maybe she did, but she didn't know how to put it into words. "Because you're the first person in a long time who's treated me like I matter," she said finally. Gideon turned to look at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "You do matter," he said. The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked away, blinking back tears. Before she could respond, Gideon stiffened. His hand tightened on the rifle, and he leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What is it?" Mara whispered. "Movement. East side of the clearing." Mara followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing, then a flicker of motion, a dark shape moving through the trees. "How many?" she asked, her heart racing. "Can't tell yet. At least one. Maybe more." They watched in tense silence as the shape drew closer. It was a man on foot, moving slowly, carefully. He wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and raised his hands. "Gideon Cross!" His voice carried across the snow. "I'm not armed. I just want to talk." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Stay here." He stood and moved to the door, rifle in hand. Mara wanted to argue, but she knew it would be pointless. She watched from the window as Gideon stepped outside, the rifle pointed at the stranger. "Talk," Gideon said. The man lowered his hand slightly. "My name's Jacob Miller. I'm a friend of Daniel Cross. Your brother." Gideon went still. "Daniel's been dead for 23 years. "I know. I was with him when he died." The words hung in the cold air. Gideon's grip on the rifle didn't waver. "Prove it." The man reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tossed it underhand toward Gideon. It landed in the snow between them. Gideon crouched and picked it up, keeping the rifle trained on the stranger. He opened the pouch and pulled out a small object, a tarnished silver pocket watch. Mara saw Gideon's face change. The mask slipped just for a moment, and she saw raw grief flash across his features. "Where did you get this?" Gideon's voice was rough. "Daniel gave it to me the night he died. Made me promise to find you, to tell you the truth about what happened. I know what happened. Hank Doyle and his men ambushed the drive, left Daniel to bleed out. That's part of it, but not all of it." Gideon stood, his expression hard. "Then start talking." Jacob took a step forward. "Daniel didn't die right away. He held on for 3 days, kept saying he had to tell you something. About the ambush, about who really set it up. Hank Doyle set it up. Doyle was the trigger man, but he wasn't the one who planned it." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "Who did?" "General Marcus Vane." The name hit like a thunderclap. Mara saw Gideon's whole body tense, saw the rifle shake slightly in his hands. "You're lying," Gideon said, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm not. Vane wanted the cattle, needed them for his own operations. He hired Doyle and his gang to take the drive and make it look like bandits. Daniel figured it out. He found documents proving Vane's involvement. That's why Doyle shot him, to keep him quiet." Gideon was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "If that's true, where are the documents now?" "Daniel hid them. Before he died, he told me where. Made me swear I'd get them to you." "And it took you 23 years? Jacob's face tightened. "Vane's people were watching me. I couldn't move without being followed. It wasn't until Vane died that I finally had a chance. Vane didn't die. I killed him. I know. And when you did, his network started to crumble. That's when I made my move. I've been tracking you ever since. Gideon stared at the man, his mind clearly racing. Mara could see the war happening behind his eyes, the need to believe fighting against years of suspicion and survival. Where are the documents? Gideon asked finally. Safe, hidden. I'll take you to them, but first we need to get out of these mountains. Vane's son, Marcus Jr., he's picked up where his father left off, and he knows you're here. How? The marshal you killed? He was on Vane's payroll. Before he died, he sent word back to Denver. Mara's blood ran cold. Gideon's expression darkened. How many men is Vane sending? Enough. They'll be here within 2 days, maybe less. Gideon looked back at the cabin, at Mara watching from the window. Then he turned back to Jacob. If you're lying to me, I'm not. If you are, I'll put a bullet in you myself. Jacob nodded. Fair enough. Gideon lowered the rifle slightly. We leave at first light. Be ready. Jacob nodded and melted back into the trees. Gideon stood in the clearing for a long moment, staring at the pocket watch in his hand. Then he turned and walked back to the cabin. Mara met him at the door. Do you believe him? Gideon's face was a mask again, but she could see the turmoil underneath. I don't know, but we can't take the chance. What do? We pack. We move fast, and we hope he's telling the truth. They spent the next hour preparing. Gideon gathered supplies, dried meat, hardtack, ammunition. Mara moved as best she could with her injured shoulder, rolling blankets and filling canteens. Every movement sent sharp pains through her arm, but she gritted her teeth and kept working. As they worked, Gideon was silent, his face set in hard lines. Mara could see the weight pressing down on him, the past rising up to meet the present, old wounds tearing open. Gideon, she said quietly. He looked up. Whatever happens, I'm with you. His expression softened, just slightly. You don't owe me anything, Mara. I know, but I'm still with you. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. They finished packing as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Gideon saddled the horse and helped Mara mount, her injured shoulder screaming in protest. Jacob emerged from the trees, leading his own horse, a sturdy gray mare. Ready? He asked. Gideon swung up behind Mara. Lead the way. They rode out, leaving the cabin behind. The forest closed in around them, dark and silent, and Mara felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. They traveled for hours, following narrow trails that wound through the mountains. Jacob led them higher, into terrain that grew increasingly treacherous. Mara clung to the saddle, her shoulder throbbing with every jolt. As the sun reached its peak, they stopped to rest near a frozen stream. Gideon helped Mara down, and she sat on a fallen log, breathing hard. Jacob stood at the edge of the clearing, scanning the forest behind them. See anything? Gideon asked. Not yet, but they're coming. How do you know? Because I'd be coming if I were them. And I'd be coming fast. Gideon's jaw tightened. He turned to Mara. How's the shoulder? It hurts, but I can manage. We'll rest for 10 minutes, no more. Mara nodded, grateful for even that small reprieve. Jacob approached, his expression cautious. There's something else you should know. Gideon looked at him sharply. What? The documents Daniel hid. They're not just about the ambush, they're about everything. Vane's entire operation. Names, dates, bank accounts, evidence of crimes that go all the way to the top. The top of what? The territorial government. Maybe higher. Gideon went still. You're saying this is bigger than Vane. Much bigger. Vane was just one piece of a network. If those documents get out, it could bring down half the territory. Mara's stomach churned. Then why didn't you destroy them? Jacob looked at her. Because the truth matters, even if it's dangerous. Gideon shook his head. This is insane. We need to... He stopped mid-sentence, his head snapping around. What? Mara began. Quiet. The forest had gone silent. No birds, no wind, just an oppressive, watching stillness. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Distant, but growing closer. They found us, Jacob said, his voice tight. Gideon moved fast. He pulled Mara to her feet and lifted her onto the horse. Go, now. What about you? I'll slow them down. Jacob, get her to Denver. Gideon, go. Jacob grabbed his horse's reins and kicked it into motion. Mara looked back, saw Gideon pulling his rifle from the saddle, his face set and hard. Gideon, she screamed, but Jacob was already riding hard, pulling her horse along, and the forest swallowed them whole. Behind them, gunshots cracked through the air. Mara's heart shattered. Jacob rode like the devil himself was chasing them, the horses crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs. Mara clung to the saddle with her good arm, her injured shoulder screaming with every jolt, tears streaming down her face as more gunshots echoed through the mountains behind them. We have to go back, she shouted over the thunder of hooves. We can't, Jacob called back. Gideon knew what he was doing. He's buying us time. He'll die. Maybe. Or maybe he'll do what he's been doing for 13 years, survive. The words were meant to comfort, but they felt hollow. Mara twisted in the saddle, looking back through the trees, but there was nothing to see except shadows and snow and the dark spaces between the pines. They rode for another hour, the terrain growing steeper, more treacherous. Finally, Jacob slowed the horses and guided them into a narrow ravine sheltered by overhanging rock. He dismounted and helped Mara down, catching her when her legs buckled. Easy, he said. We need to rest the horses, and you need to breathe. Mara pushed away from him, stumbling to the edge of the ravine. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her whole body shaking. How can you be so calm? He's back there fighting them alone. Jacob's face was grim. Because falling apart won't help him, and it won't help you. You don't understand. He saved me. I know what he did. Daniel told me about Gideon, about the kind of man he was even before the war, the kind who'd walk into hell if it meant protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. Jacob moved to stand beside her. Your man back there. He's not just buying us time. He's making a choice. Same choice he's been making his whole life. What choice? To stand between the wolves and the innocent, even if it costs him everything. Mara's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But Jacob was right. Falling apart wouldn't bring Gideon back. How far to Denver? She asked, her voice raw. 2 days if we push hard. Maybe 3 if we have to go around patrols. Patrols? Vane's men control most of the main routes. We'll have to take the back trails. It'll be slower, but safer. Mara nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Then we go. Now. Jacob studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. But first, let me look at that shoulder. Before Mara could protest, he'd already moved to her side and was carefully peeling back the makeshift bandage. She hissed through her teeth as the cloth pulled away from the wound. Jacob's expression darkened. It's getting infected. The cauterization helped, but you need proper medical attention. Can we make it to Denver first? We'll have to, but you're going to be in rough shape by the time we get there. I've been in rough shape my whole life. I can handle a few more days. A ghost of a smile crossed Jacob's face. I can see why Gideon took to you. They remounted and continued, moving through the mountains like ghosts. Jacob was cautious, constantly scanning the terrain, stopping frequently to listen. Twice, he led them off the trail entirely, hiding in dense thickets while distant riders passed within shouting distance. As night fell, they made camp in a small cave halfway up a cliff face. Jacob built a tiny fire, just enough to boil water and warm some dried meat. Mara sat wrapped in a blanket, shivering despite the flames. Tell me about my father, she said suddenly. Jacob looked up from the fire. What about him? You said Vane hired him for the ambush. Did you know him before? Jacob's expression hardened. I knew of him. Hank Doyle was a hired gun. The kind of man who'd kill his own mother if the price was right. Vane used men like him for the jobs that couldn't be traced back to official channels. And Daniel figured out the connection. Yes. He was smart, your friend's brother. Too smart for his own good, maybe. He started asking questions about where Vane was getting his supplies, found discrepancies in the accounts, realized someone was skimming off the top and covering it up with fake raids. So Vane had him killed. Not directly. That's not how men like Vane operate. They keep their hands clean. Let men like your father do the dirty work. Mara stared into the fire, her jaw tight. I spent my whole life thinking he was just mean. Just a drunk who took his failures out on everyone around him. I never knew he was a murderer. Would it have changed anything if you had? She thought about that. No, probably not. I was trapped either way. You're not trapped anymore. Mara looked at him. Aren't I? We're running from men who want to kill us. Gideon's probably dead. And even if we make it to Denver, what then? You said these documents could bring down the whole territory. You think those people will just let that happen? No, Jacob said quietly. They'll fight. They'll lie. They'll kill to protect their secrets. But that's exactly why the truth has to come out. Even if it gets us killed? Especially then. Mara shook her head, exhausted. You sound like Gideon. Maybe that's because we both learned from the same man. Daniel believed truth was worth dying for. I think Gideon came to believe it too, after his brother was gone. And what do you believe? Jacob poked at the fire with a stick. I believe some debts can't be paid back, only passed forward. Daniel saved my life once. Pulled me out of a river when my horse threw me during a crossing. I swore I'd pay him back, but he died before I got the chance. He looked at Mara. So now I pay it forward, to you, to Gideon, to anyone else who needs it. They fell silent, the fire crackling between them. Mara tried to sleep, but pain and worry kept her hovering in a half-awake state, every sound making her jolt upright. Once she thought she heard hoofbeats, but Jacob assured her it was just the wind. When dawn broke gray and cold, they extinguished the fire and rode out again. The second day was harder than the first. Mara's shoulder had swollen, hot to the touch, and fever was starting to set in. She drifted in and out of consciousness, barely aware of the landscape passing around her. Jacob had to tie her to the saddle to keep her from falling. Stay with me, Mara, he kept saying. We're almost there. But almost felt like forever. On the third day, they finally saw Denver in the distance, a sprawling collection of buildings clustered along the river, smoke rising from countless chimneys. It looked like civilization, like safety. Jacob didn't head straight for the city. Instead, he circled around to the south, approaching through a warren of smaller streets and alleyways. He stopped at a nondescript boarding house on the edge of town and half-carried Mara inside. The proprietor, a thin woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, took one look at Mara and immediately began issuing orders. Within minutes, Mara was in a bed. A doctor was on his way, and Jacob was standing guard at the door. The doctor arrived an hour later, an older man with steady hands and a no-nonsense manner. He examined Mara's shoulder, his face grave. Infection's bad, he said. Another day and she'd have been past saving. As it is, she's going to need antibiotics and bed rest. Lots of it. Can you help her? Jacob asked. I can try, but she's going to be down for at least a week, maybe more. Jacob nodded. Do what you need to do. Money's not an issue. The doctor went to work, and Mara drifted in a haze of laudanum and fever dreams. She saw Gideon's face, heard his voice telling her to stay still, to breathe. She saw her father's shack burning. She saw the marshal falling. She saw everything and nothing, time losing all meaning. When she finally woke, truly woke, it was to find herself in a clean bed, in a clean room with sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Her shoulder was properly bandaged, the pain reduced to a dull ache. Jacob sat in a chair by the window, reading a newspaper. How long? Mara's voice came out as a croak. Jacob looked up. 4 days. The doctor wasn't sure you'd make it. But I did. Yes. You're tougher than you look. Mara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Jacob was at her side in an instant, helping her prop herself against the pillows. Easy. You're still healing. Have you heard anything? The question she'd been dreading. About Gideon? Jacob's expression was carefully neutral. No, but that doesn't mean anything. If he made it out, he'd stay low for a while, wait for things to cool down. And if he didn't make it out? Then we honor him by finishing what he started. Mara's chest tightened. She wanted to believe Gideon was alive, that he'd come walking through that door any minute with his rifle and his quiet certainty. But hope felt dangerous, like something that would cut her if she held it too tight. The documents, she said. Where are they? Safe, for now. But we need to decide what to do with them. You said they could bring down Vane's network. They could, but it won't be easy. The men involved have power, influence. They'll do everything they can to suppress the truth. Then we need someone more powerful. Jacob smiled grimly. That's exactly what I was thinking. There's a federal judge here in Denver, Maxwell Whitaker. He's one of the few men in the territory who can't be bought. If we can get the documents to him, he might be able to start an investigation. Might? There are no guarantees, but it's our best shot. Mara nodded slowly. Then that's what we do. Over the next 2 days, Mara regained her strength. The fever broke, and the infection began to recede under the doctor's care. Jacob came and went, making quiet inquiries, laying the groundwork for their next move. On the 3rd day, he returned with news. Whitaker will see us, but there's a problem. What kind of problem? Vane's son knows we're in Denver. He's put the word out. There's a bounty on both our heads, $500 each, dead or alive. Mara's stomach dropped. How did he find out? Could be anyone. The doctor, the landlady. Someone saw us coming into town. Jacob's face was hard. We need to move fast. Tomorrow night there's a reception at the governor's mansion. Whitaker will be there. So will half the territorial government, including Marcus Vane Jr. You want us to walk into a room full of people who want us dead? It's the only way. Whitaker won't meet with us in private. He can't risk the appearance of impropriety. But at a public event with witnesses? He'll have to at least listen. This is insane. Yes, but it's also our only chance. Mara stared at him. If Gideon were here, what would he say? Jacob smiled faintly. He'd say it's a terrible plan. Then he'd do it anyway. Despite everything, Mara felt a flicker of something that might have been hope, or maybe just stubbornness. Either way, she wasn't backing down. All right, she said. What do we need to do? The next day was a blur of preparation. Jacob procured clothes for both of them, nothing fancy but respectable enough to pass at a formal reception. For Mara, a simple dark dress with long sleeves to hide her bandaged shoulder. For Jacob, a suit that made him look almost respectable. As the sun set, they made their way across town to the governor's mansion, a sprawling brick structure on a hill overlooking the city. Carriages lined the circular drive and light spilled from every window. Music and laughter drifted on the evening air. Mara's heart hammered as they approached the entrance. Jacob offered his arm, and she took it, trying to look calm even as her palms sweated. They passed through the front doors and into a grand foyer filled with well-dressed men and women. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne. A string quartet played in the corner. Stay close, Jacob murmured, and try not to look like you're about to bolt. I am about to bolt. I know. Do it anyway. They moved through the crowd, Jacob's eyes constantly scanning. Mara felt exposed, certain that at any moment someone would recognize them, would shout for the guards. But no one even glanced at them. They were invisible, just 2 more faces in a sea of strangers. Jacob led her through a series of rooms until they reached a library near the back of the mansion. A man stood alone by the bookshelves, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Judge Maxwell Whitaker. Jacob approached cautiously. Your Honor. Whitaker turned, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Miller, I wasn't certain you'd actually come. We need to talk. So your message said, though I'll confess I'm curious why you chose such a public venue. Because if we'd met in private, we'd both be dead by morning. Whitaker's eyebrows rose. Strong words. True words. Jacob reached into his coat and pulled out a leather satchel. This contains documents that prove General Marcus Vane was involved in criminal conspiracy, murder, and treason. It also implicates several current members of the territorial government. Whitaker's expression shifted, becoming guarded. Those are serious accusations. They're backed by serious evidence. Evidence obtained how? That's complicated. I'm sure it is. Whitaker's gaze moved to Mara. And who are you? Mara straightened her shoulders. Mara Doyle. My father was one of Vane's hired men. He was involved in the ambush that killed Daniel Cross. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. Daniel Cross. I remember that case. It was ruled a bandit raid. It was ruled wrong. Can you prove that? The documents can. Whitaker was silent for a long moment. Then he said, if I take these documents, if I start an investigation based on them, I'll be making powerful enemies, men who won't hesitate to destroy me. I know, Jacob said quietly, but you'll also be doing what's right. Right doesn't always win, Mr. Miller. No, but it's still worth fighting for. Whitaker looked at the satchel, then at Jacob, then at Mara. She could see the war happening behind his eyes, duty versus self-preservation, truth versus comfort. Finally, he reached out and took the satchel. I'll review these, he said, but I'm making no promises. If the evidence is as strong as you claim, I'll move forward. If not, it is. Whitaker nodded. Then we'll see. He started to turn away, but Mara caught his arm. Your Honor, she said, her voice urgent. There's one more thing. Gideon Cross, Alistair Crowe. He's innocent. He killed Vane, yes, but only because Vane was selling prisoners into forced labor. The proof is in those documents. Whitaker's expression was unreadable. I'll take that under advisement. He saved my life, Mara pressed, and now he's out there somewhere, maybe dead, maybe dying, because he stood up to men like Vane. Miss Doyle, please, just promise me you'll look at the evidence with an open mind. Whitaker studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I promise. He slipped the satchel inside his coat and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Jacob let out a slow breath. That's done then. What now? A hand clamped down on Mara's shoulder. She spun, her heart leaping into her throat, and found herself staring into the cold blue eyes of a man in an expensive suit. He was young, maybe 30, with dark hair slicked back and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Doyle, I presume, he said, his voice smooth as silk. My name is Marcus Vane. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Mara's blood turned to ice. Jacob moved to step between them, but two men in dark suits materialized from the crowd, blocking his path. I wouldn't, Vane said pleasantly. We're in public, full of witnesses. Wouldn't want to cause a scene. What do you want? Mara managed, her voice shaking. Just to talk, somewhere private. Vane's grip tightened on her shoulder. You see those documents you just handed to Judge Whitaker? They're stolen property that was taken from my father under false pretenses. I'd like them back. They're evidence of crimes. They're lies. Fabrications created by a madman and his accomplices. Vane leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. You have one chance, Miss Doyle. Tell me where Gideon Cross is hiding, and I'll make this quick and painless. Refuse, and I'll make sure you suffer for every second my father spent in the ground. Mara's mind raced. She could scream, could fight, could try to run, but Vane's men were everywhere, and she was alone. No, not alone. The library door burst open, and a figure stepped through, tall, battered, his coat torn and blood-stained, but very much alive. Gideon. His gray eyes locked onto Vane, and his voice cut through the room like a blade. Let her go. Vane's face went pale. You're supposed to be dead. I've been supposed to be dead for 13 years. Hasn't taken yet. Gideon crossed the room in 3 strides, his presence filling the space, and Vane's men backed away despite themselves. Vane released Mara and straightened, trying to regain his composure. You're under arrest, Captain Crowe, for the murder of my father. Then arrest me. But you let her walk first. I don't think so. Gideon's expression went cold. I said, let her walk. The room had gone silent. Everyone was watching now. Guests, waiters, guards. Vane looked around, realizing too late that he'd lost control of the situation. In a public space surrounded by witnesses, he couldn't simply execute Gideon without consequences. This isn't over, Vane hissed. No, Gideon agreed. It's not. At that moment, Judge Whitaker reappeared, flanked by 2 federal marshals. Mr. Vane, Whitaker said, his voice carrying authority, I've just finished reviewing certain documents that have come into my possession. Documents that suggest your father was involved in criminal conspiracy and that you may have continued his activities. I'm placing you under arrest pending investigation. Vane's face went from pale to crimson. You can't. I can and I am. Marshals, take him into custody. The marshals moved forward, and Vane's men melted away into the crowd. Vane struggled, shouting threats and accusations, but it was over. Whitaker turned to Gideon. "You too, Captain Crow. Until we sort out the full truth of what happened with General Vane, you'll remain in federal custody." Gideon nodded slowly. "Understood." "Gideon," Mara started forward, but Jacob caught her arm. Gideon met her eyes across the room. "It's all right," he said quietly. "This is how it has to be. But trust me." The marshals led him away, and Mara felt something inside her chest tear. Jacob's hand tightened on her arm. "Come on, we need to go." "I can't just leave him." "You're not. But we're no good to him if we're locked up too." Mara let herself be led out of the mansion, her mind reeling. They'd done it. They'd gotten the documents to Whitaker. They'd exposed Vane. But Gideon was in chains, and the fight was far from over. The federal courthouse stood like a fortress in the center of Denver, its stone facade gray and imposing against the morning sky. Mara sat on a bench across the street, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, watching the entrance. It had been 3 days since Gideon's arrest. 3 days of waiting, of pacing the boarding house room, of Jacob telling her to be patient while the system worked. But Mara had stopped believing in systems a long time ago. "You need to eat something," Jacob said, sitting down beside her. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't been hungry for 3 days. You're going to collapse." Mara didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the courthouse doors, willing them to open, willing Gideon to walk out. Jacob sighed. "Whitaker's doing everything he can. The documents are solid. He's building a case not just against Marcus Vane Jr., but against the entire network. And while he's building his case, Gideon's sitting in a cell. Better a cell than a grave." Mara finally looked at him. "Is it?" Jacob's expression softened. "He's alive, Mara. That's what matters." "For how long? You said it yourself. These people have power. They'll find a way to silence him before he can testify." "Not if we move first." Mara frowned. "What does that mean?" Jacob leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I've been asking around, talking to people. Vane's network is already starting to crack. Some of his allies are distancing themselves. Others are looking for deals. But there's one person who might have the key to bringing the whole thing down." "Who?" "Evelyn Hart. She's married to Senator Raymond Hart, one of Vane's biggest supporters, and the man who helped bury the evidence against General Vane 13 years ago." "Why would she help us?" "Because she hates her husband. Word is, he's violent, controlling. She's been looking for a way out for years, but Hart has too much power, too many connections. She can't leave without destroying herself in the process." Mara's pulse quickened. "Unless she destroys him first." "Exactly. If we can convince her to turn over whatever evidence she has, letters, documents, anything that proves Hart's involvement, it could be the final nail in the coffin." "Where is she?" "The Hart estate. About 5 miles outside of town, big place, guards, gates, not exactly welcoming to visitors." "Then we don't go as visitors." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" Mara stood, dumping her cold coffee into the street. "I'm thinking we're done waiting for other people to save us. We go to Evelyn Hart. We tell her we can give her what she wants, freedom, if she gives us what we need." "And if she refuses?" "Then we find another way. But we try this first." Jacob studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Gideon would be proud of you." "Gideon would tell me I'm being reckless." "Probably, but he'd do it anyway." They spent the rest of the day planning. Jacob used his contacts to get a layout of the Hart estate, to learn the guards' routines, to find the weak points in the security. As the sun set, they made their way to the edge of the property, 2 shadows moving through the gathering darkness. The estate was everything Jacob had described: sprawling grounds, iron gates, stone walls. Through the windows of the main house, Mara could see figures moving, hear the faint sound of voices. "There," Jacob whispered, pointing to a side entrance partially hidden by overgrown hedges. "Service door. Should be unlocked this time of night. Servants come and go." They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. The door was indeed unlocked, and they slipped inside, finding themselves in a narrow hallway that smelled of cooking and candle wax. Voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. Jacob led the way, moving with practiced stealth until they reached a staircase leading to the upper floors. Her chambers should be on the second floor, Jacob murmured. East wing. They climbed the stairs, every creak of the wood making Mara's heart jump. At the top they paused, listening. Footsteps. A door closing. Then silence. Jacob nodded toward a door at the end of the hall. That one. They approached cautiously. Jacob knocked softly, 3 quick taps. No answer. He knocked again. The door opened a crack and a woman's face appeared, pale, beautiful, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that held a lifetime of carefully controlled fear. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Friends," Jacob said. "We need to talk. About your husband." Evelyn Hart's eyes widened. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at them. "You shouldn't be here. If Raymond finds you—" "We know the risks," Mara said quietly, "but we also know you want out. We can help you." Evelyn hesitated, her hand trembling on the door. Then she pulled it open wider. "Quickly." They stepped inside and Evelyn locked the door behind them. Her chambers were elegant but cold. Expensive furniture, heavy drapes, everything perfectly arranged and utterly lifeless. "You have 5 minutes," Evelyn said, her voice tight. "Raymond is downstairs entertaining guests. He'll expect me to join him soon." "We don't need 5 minutes," Mara said. "We just need to know if you'll help us bring him down." Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "Do you have any idea what you're asking? Raymond Hart is one of the most powerful men in the territory. He has judges in his pocket, marshals, politicians. You can't touch him." "We already have," Jacob said. "Judge Whitaker has documents proving Raymond's connection to Marcus Vane and the General's criminal network. But we need more. We need proof that can't be dismissed or explained away." "Letters," Mara added. "Correspondence. Anything that shows his direct involvement." Evelyn's face had gone pale. "Whitaker has the documents?" "Yes." "And Vane?" "Under arrest." Evelyn sank into a chair, her hands shaking. I didn't think anyone would actually—" She looked up at them, tears gathering in her eyes. "Do you know what it's like? Living with a monster, smiling for the cameras, playing the dutiful wife, while he—" Her voice broke. Mara knelt beside her. "I know. I lived with my father for 57 years. I know what it's like to be trapped, to feel like there's no way out." Evelyn met her eyes. "How did you escape?" "Someone gave me a choice. Someone showed me I was worth more than what he told me I was worth." Mara's voice was steady. "Now I'm giving you that same choice. Help us, and we'll make sure you're protected, that you're free." Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Then she stood and crossed to a large wardrobe in the corner. She pushed aside dresses and pulled out a locked metal box from the back. "He thinks I don't know about these," she said, producing a key from a chain around her neck. "But I've known for years. I've been too afraid to use them." She opened the box and pulled out a stack of letters bound with ribbon. Correspondence between Raymond and the General, proof of bribes, of murders covered up, of men sold like cattle. She held them out to Mara. "Take them, use them, destroy him." Mara took the letters, her hands trembling. "Come with us. Right now. We'll get you somewhere safe." Evelyn shook her head. "I can't. If I disappear, Raymond will know something's wrong. He'll destroy the evidence before it can be used. I need to stay, to keep up appearances until the trial." "That's too dangerous," Jacob protested. "I've lived with danger for 15 years. I can manage a few more days." Evelyn's smile was sad. "Besides, seeing the look on his face when they come to arrest him, that will be worth it." Before Mara could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Heavy, purposeful. Evelyn's face went white. "That's Raymond. You need to go. Now." "The service stairs," Jacob said. "Back the way we came." But the footsteps were already at the door. The handle turned. Evelyn moved fast. She pushed Mara and Jacob toward a heavy tapestry hanging on the wall. "Behind there. Don't make a sound." They slipped behind the tapestry just as the door opened. Through a gap in the fabric, Mara could see Senator Raymond Hart enter the room, a tall man with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. "Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth, You weren't downstairs. I had a headache, Evelyn replied, her voice perfectly calm. I came up to rest. Without telling me? I didn't want to interrupt your guests. Hart crossed the room toward her, and Mara saw Evelyn tense. You know I don't like it when you disappear without telling me. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Hart studied her for a long moment. Then his eyes drifted to the wardrobe, to the open door, to the metal box sitting on the floor. His expression changed. What's this? He moved toward the box. Nothing. Just some old things I was sorting through. Old things. Hart knelt and picked up the box, turning it over in his hands. This was locked. I found the key. Did you? His voice had gone cold. Evelyn's calm facade cracked just slightly. Raymond, he backhanded her across the face. Evelyn staggered, crying out, and Hart grabbed her by the throat, slamming her against the wall. Where are they? He hissed. Where are the letters? Mara didn't think. She just moved. She burst from behind the tapestry, the letters clutched in one hand, and Hart spun toward her, his eyes widening in shock. Let her go, Mara said, her voice shaking but firm. Hart released Evelyn and turned to face Mara fully. His shock shifted to cold calculation. You must be Mara Doyle. I've heard so much about you. Let her go, Mara repeated. Or what? You'll scream? Alert the guards? Hart smiled. By all means, try. Jacob stepped out from behind the tapestry, and Hart's smile faltered. Senator, Jacob said quietly, you're done. Those letters prove everything, and Judge Whitaker already has the other documents. Even if you kill us right now, the truth is out. Hart's face twisted with rage. You have no idea what you've done. The people I work with, they won't just let this go. They'll hunt you down. They'll make you wish you'd never been born. They can try, Mara said, but I've spent my whole life being hunted. I'm still here. Hart lunged toward her, but Jacob was faster. He caught Hart's arm and twisted it behind his back, driving him to his knees. Evelyn, Jacob said, get the guards. Tell them the senator has been taken ill. Tell them whatever you need to. But get them here. Evelyn nodded and fled from the room. Hart struggled against Jacob's grip, cursing and threatening, but Jacob held him firm until guards appeared in the doorway. What's going on here? One of them demanded. Your senator is under arrest, Jacob said. For conspiracy, bribery, and accessory to murder, Judge Whitaker will be issuing a warrant within the hour. You can't, Hart started, but Jacob tightened his grip. We already have. The guards looked at each other, uncertain. Then one of them stepped forward and helped Jacob restrain Hart. Evelyn reappeared in the doorway, her face bruised but her eyes bright with something that looked like freedom. Thank you, she whispered to Mara. Mara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As the guards led Hart away, his threats echoing down the hallway, Jacob turned to Mara. That was reckless. I know. You could have been killed. I know. Jacob smiled. Definitely Gideon's influence. They left the estate the way they'd come, the letters safe in Mara's coat. By the time they reached the courthouse, dawn was breaking over Denver, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Judge Whitaker was already there, his chambers lit despite the early hour. He took the letters from Mara and spent the next hour reading through them, his expression growing darker with each page. Finally, he set them down and looked at Mara and Jacob. This is everything I need, he said. With these letters and the documents you already provided, I can file charges against not just Vane and Hart, but a dozen other men in their network. This goes all the way to the territorial governor's office. What about Gideon? Mara asked, her voice tight. Whitaker's expression softened. Captain Crow will be released. The evidence clearly shows he acted to stop a criminal conspiracy. He'll be exonerated of all charges related to General Vane's death. Relief flooded through Mara so suddenly her knees nearly buckled. When? She managed. Today. Within the hour. Whitaker stood. I'll handle the paperwork myself. True to his word, an hour later Mara stood outside the courthouse as the doors opened and Gideon walked out. He looked exhausted, his face lined with weariness, bruises darkening his jaw. But when he saw Mara, something shifted in his expression. A softening, a warmth she'd rarely seen. She ran to him, and he caught her, pulling her close despite the pain it must have caused his battered body. "You're alive," she breathed against his chest. "So are you. I thought, when they took you, I know." His arms tightened around her. "But we're both still here." They stood like that for a long moment, not caring about the people passing by, the stares, the whispers. Finally, Gideon pulled back and looked at her. "Jacob told me what you did, breaking into Hart's estate, confronting him. Someone had to. It should have been me. You were in a cell. Still should have been me." Mara smiled despite herself. "Well, it wasn't. So you'll just have to live with the fact that I saved you for once." Something flickered in Gideon's eyes. Amusement, maybe, or pride. "I can live with that." Over the following weeks, the city erupted into chaos. Arrests were made. Trials began. The network that Vane and Hart had built over decades began to crumble as men scrambled to cut deals, to save themselves by betraying their allies. Judge Whitaker worked tirelessly, building case after case, and the truth, ugly and brutal and undeniable, spilled out into the light. Gideon's name was cleared. The army issued a formal apology and offered him reinstatement with full honors. He declined. Evelyn Hart divorced her husband while he awaited trial and used her newfound freedom to establish a shelter for women escaping violent homes. She asked Mara to help run it. Mara said yes. Jacob disappeared one day, leaving only a note that said he had other debts to pay forward. Mara hoped he found what he was looking for. And Hank Doyle? He died alone in his shack during a winter storm, the bottle finally claiming what years of cruelty couldn't. Mara got the news from a letter delivered to the boarding house. She read it once, then burned it in the fireplace. She felt nothing, and that was exactly as it should be. On a clear day in early spring, Mara and Gideon stood at the edge of Denver, their horses packed and ready. The city stretched out behind them, bustling and alive, but their eyes were on the mountains ahead. "Where do we go from here?" Mara asked. Gideon looked at her. "Where do you want to go?" It was the same question he'd asked her in the cabin all those months ago. Back then, she hadn't known how to answer. She'd spent so long just surviving that the idea of wanting something, of choosing something, had felt impossible. But things were different now. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere we can build something that's ours. Not running from the past. Not hiding from the future. Just living." Gideon's expression softened. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small and silver, the pocket watch Jacob had returned to him. Daniel's watch. He looked at it for a long moment, his thumb running over the worn surface. Then he turned and hurled it into the river that ran alongside the road. Mara watched it disappear beneath the water. "Why did you do that?" "Because I've been carrying the dead for too long," Gideon said quietly. "Daniel's gone. My old life is gone. It's time to let it go." He turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw no shadows in his eyes. No ghosts, just a man standing in the light, choosing to stay there. "I'm not good at this," he said. "At being with someone. At building a life. I've spent 13 years running, and I don't know how to stop." "Then we'll figure it out together," Mara said. "We'll stumble. We'll make mistakes. But we'll do it as equals. As partners." Gideon held out his hand. Mara took it. Together they mounted their horses and rode away from Denver, away from the past, away from everything that had tried to break them. They rode toward the mountains, toward open sky and clean air, and a future they would write themselves. And for the first time in her life, Mara Doyle wasn't afraid. She was free. The mountains rose before them, snow-capped and eternal, and as they climbed the narrow trails that wound through pine forests and across rushing streams, Mara felt something inside her chest expand. It was a feeling she couldn't name at first. Too big, too bright, too new. Then she realized what it was. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of someone drowning, but the steady, certain hope of someone who'd survived the storm and found solid ground on the other side. They rode for 3 days, following trails that grew fainter with each mile, until they found a valley tucked between 2 peaks. A stream ran through it, clear and cold, and meadow grass grew thick along the banks. It was isolated, beautiful, and utterly theirs. "Here," Mara said, bringing her horse to a stop. Gideon dismounted and walked to the edge of the stream, looking out across the valley. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Over the following months, they built a cabin, small but sturdy, with a good fireplace and real glass in the windows. Gideon proved to be skilled with his hands, and Mara learned quickly, her body growing stronger with each day of physical work. They planted a garden, built a shed for the horses, cleared land for a small pasture. It was hard work, exhausting work, but it was theirs. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains and painted the valley in shades of orange and gold, they sat together on the cabin's porch. Mara leaned against Gideon's shoulder, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching the light fade. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The old life? No? Not even a little?" Gideon was quiet for a moment. "I miss Daniel. I'll always miss him. But the anger, the need for revenge, that's gone. It died the moment I chose to save you instead of kill your father." Mara turned to look at him. "Do you regret that choice?" "Never. Even though he got away with it? Even though he died without ever paying for what he did?" "He paid," Gideon said quietly. "Maybe not the way I wanted, but he spent his whole life rotting from the inside out. And in the end, he died alone and unmourned. That's punishment enough." Mara thought about her father, about the years of fear and pain and slow suffocation, about the woman she'd been under his roof and the woman she was becoming now. "I don't hate him anymore," she said softly. "I don't feel anything at all." "That's because you're free of him. Really free." "Are you? Free of Vane?" Gideon looked out at the mountains. "Getting there. Little more each day." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear overhead, one by one, until the sky was filled with them. "Gideon," Mara said. "Yeah?" "Thank you for giving me this." "You gave it to yourself. I just opened the door." "No, you did more than that. You showed me I was worth saving, that I was worth something more than what he told me I was worth." Her voice caught. "You saw me when I was invisible." Gideon turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. "You were never invisible, Mara. You just lived with people who refused to see you." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I see you," he said. "And what I see is someone who survived hell and came out the other side still capable of kindness, still capable of hope. That's not nothing. That's everything." Mara felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of pain. They were something else. Something cleaner. She leaned forward and kissed him, tentative at first, then with more certainty. Gideon kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face, and for a long moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, two broken people who'd found a way to fit their jagged edges together. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Well," Mara said, a little breathless. "That's new?" "Good. New or bad new?" "Good. Definitely good." Gideon's smile widened, and Mara realized it was the first time she'd ever seen him look truly happy. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, then sat by the fire talking about nothing and everything, plans for the garden, whether they should get chickens, what they'd do when winter came. Small things. Normal things. The kind of things Mara had never thought she'd have. As the months turned into years, their life together took shape. They weren't perfect. They fought sometimes, Gideon's silences clashing with Mara's need to talk things through, her stubbornness meeting his equally formidable will. But they always worked through it, always came back to the understanding that they were stronger together than apart. Word reached them occasionally from Denver. The trials had concluded. Marcus Vane Jr. and Raymond Hart were both serving life sentences. The governor had resigned in disgrace. The entire territorial government had been restructured from the ground up. The truth had won. Not easily, not cleanly, but it had won. Evelyn Hart wrote to Mara once, a long letter describing the shelter she'd built and the women she was helping. She ended with a simple line, "You gave me my life back. I'll never forget it." Mara wrote back telling her about the valley, about the cabin, about the quiet life she and Gideon had built. She invited Evelyn to visit whenever she wanted. Evelyn never came, but she continued to write. And that was enough. One fall afternoon, 5 years after they'd first arrived in the valley, Mara was working in the garden when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a rider coming up the trail, a familiar figure on a gray mare. Jacob. He looked older, leaner, his face weathered by hard travel, but his smile was the same. Mara ran to meet him, and he dismounted, catching her in a rough embrace. "You found us," she said, laughing. "Wasn't easy. You picked about the most remote spot in the territory." "That was the idea." Gideon emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand, then relaxed when he saw who it was. "Jacob, it's been a long time." "Too long." Jacob shook his hand. "You both look good. Healthy." "We are." Gideon glanced at Mara. "Things are good." "I'm glad." They brought Jacob inside, fed him, listened to his stories of the years since they'd parted. He'd been traveling, he said, helping people who needed it, paying forward the debt Daniel had left him. "Sounds lonely," Mara said. Jacob shrugged. "It is sometimes, but it's also necessary. There are a lot of people out there who need someone to stand between them and the wolves." Gideon nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. I thought you might." Jacob looked at him. "You ever miss it? The fight?" "No, I had my fill of fighting. I'm done." "And you?" Jacob asked Mara. She thought about it. "I don't miss the fear, or the running, but helping people. Like what you're doing? I think there's honor in that." Jacob smiled. "Maybe one day you'll find a way to do it from here. You don't have to go looking for trouble to make a difference." "Maybe," Mara agreed. Jacob stayed for 3 days, and when he left, it was with promises to return. Mara and Gideon stood on the porch, watching him ride away down the mountain trail until he disappeared into the trees. "Think we'll see him again?" Mara asked. "I hope so." They went back inside, back to the life they'd built, and the days continued in their steady rhythm. But Jacob's words stayed with Mara, about making a difference, about helping people. One night she brought it up to Gideon. "What if we did what Evelyn's doing? What if we built a place here for people who need to escape? Women like I was, men like you were, people who just need somewhere safe to land." Gideon considered this. "It would change everything. This place wouldn't be just ours anymore." "I know, but we have so much space, so much safety. Feels selfish to keep it all to ourselves." "It's not selfish to want peace, Mara." "I know, but maybe we could have both, peace for us, safety for others." Gideon looked at her for a long moment, then he smiled. "All right, let's do it." They started small, built another cabin, then another. Word spread slowly through Evelyn's shelter, through Jacob's network, through quiet conversations in towns and settlements across the territory. People came. Not many at first, but enough. A woman fleeing a violent husband, a man running from false accusations, a family whose home had been burned by raiders. Mara and Gideon gave them shelter, gave them time to heal, gave them the same choice Gideon had once given Mara, the chance to decide their own future. Some stayed. Others left when they were ready, carrying that choice with them into the world. And slowly, the valley became more than just a home. It became a haven. Years passed. Mara's hair went fully gray, and Gideon's limp grew more pronounced in the cold months. But they were happy. Truly, deeply happy. They never married, never felt the need for a ceremony to validate what they already knew. They were partners. Equals. Two people who'd chosen each other and kept choosing each other, day after day after day. One winter evening, when Mara was 68 and Gideon was 57, they sat together by the fire in the main cabin. Snow fell softly outside, blanketing the valley in white. "Do you ever regret it?" Gideon asked. "Leaving Silver Hollow? Everything that came after?" Mara thought about the shack, about her father's fists, about the woman she'd been, small and broken and afraid. Then she thought about the woman she was now, the life she'd built, the people she'd helped. "Not for a second," she said. Gideon nodded, satisfied. He reached out and took her hand, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains, but inside everything was warm, everything was safe. Everything was exactly as it should be. And when Mara Doyle closed her eyes that night, wrapped in blankets in Gideon's arms, she didn't dream of winter. She dreamed of spring,